Chapter 11. Doug. Dirt Nap. Night. Day 2. Doug stayed in his rut under his log and made himself comfortable. He wasn't budging until he actually knew they were gone. It was a full hour until he actually heard a vehicle far off in the distance pull away. He did the mental calculations and figured they had hiked in around 5 miles from the other direction. This was also conveniently as the contrast was turning from shadow to actual night. There was still basically no moon. As soon as the sun set, he felt the temperature drop almost 20 degrees, and a shiver rolled through him. With the last bit of natural light, he pulled out his map and looked at it. Doug held out his hand and looked at his compass and aligned it with the map. The compass auto-adjusted the offset, and Doug saw that there was a town about 10 miles away. Not really a town, more like a block of stores. "Oh, crap," Doug said to himself with the familiar realization, and said to himself sarcastically, "You've got to be joking." Doug put the map away and weighed his options. If he tried to make the hike tonight, it would be dangerous and slow going. He'd get there all right, but he'd be exhausted. Otherwise, he could sleep for a few hours, make the hike early in the morning, and be there by daybreak. It seemed like it made the most sense to him. Doug made a mental assessment of his condition. He was getting colder. He hadn't gone to the bathroom in a while, and it dawned on him. He hadn't had anything to drink in a while. Doug went to take a drink from his backpack straw, then realized there was no pressure. The weight was wrong. He realized he'd been shot right through the water portion of his pack. Doug wiggled around and could feel something metal in his water bladder. His water pack was damaged and the water contaminated. He had a few emergency water packs and his homemade MREs. He got one out and ate his hodgepodge of self-sealed meals. He drank all the water, and it wasn't enough to satiate him, but it had to do. He stuffed everything back in the bag and sealed it up in hopes it wouldn't attract any attention. Then Doug got his tarp out and laid it under him, and then got out his fire bag, meant to protect him from fires and worst-case scenarios, and he turned it inside out and covered himself up with one end, so he didn't cook. He instantly started to warm back up and gently fell asleep without realizing it. Sometime during the night, Doug barely registered something small and hairy crawling in with him and falling asleep. Chapter 12. Doug. New friend? ? Pre-dawn, day 3. Doug's internal alarm clicked on and jolted him awake. Had he overslept? Where was he? He felt something move that wasn't him inside his makeshift sleeping bag. He checked his watch. His heat illuminating the timepiece just enough to see. It was around 3 a.m. The creature sleeping with Doug realized he was awake and got up, got in his face. In the weak backlight of Doug's watch, he saw the outline of a puppy's face. It was no ordinary puppy. Its nose was the wrong shape, too long. Doug did the mental calculations and figured he needed to get going to make the diner by daybreak in the nearby town. His crew would be looking for him, and that was the most logical place. The dog bonked Doug in the face with its nose to prompt him again. Warm nose, not good, Doug thought. It was sort of normal for animals to have a warm and dry noses in some circumstances, but puppies should have wet noses in this overnight climate. The dog was warm. It had been sleeping with Doug for at least a few hours. No mommy around. Probably displaced by the disaster, Doug figured. Doug rustled through his pack, which startled the puppy. Doug stopped and put his hand out, and the puppy came back, although it seemed to be limping and stumbling more than it should. They both paused inches from each other. The puppy finally resolved and put its head under Doug's hand. Doug cupped his hand over the puppy's head and gave the puppy's hair a good shuffle. This made the puppy happy. Trust was earned, hierarchy was established, everything was good. Doug began rustling through his pack again and found something they both could enjoy. They had some more of Doug's mix and match meals ready to eat. Then there was the issue with water. Doug was getting so thirsty. He drank almost all of what he had left, then put a dab of water on the puppy's nose. The puppy seemed to understand this and wagged its little tail as much as it could. So they both had a little to eat, and they both had a little water. It was time to head out. Doug packed up, and away they both went together. With the dab of water and the little bit of food, it made the puppy a bit more lively. It still favored one leg and appeared to be completely exhausted, however. There was no moon, and so Doug had to use his flashlight more than he wanted. He checked his map for reference and checked the compass on his watch every 5 to 10 minutes. Doug's GPS was on the fritz again, so he put it away. He didn't need it anyway. The puppy wasn't going to run around and patrol like a normal dog would. The puppy was following Doug as best as it could. It would lag behind a bit, and Doug would use the time to check his map. The duo walked like this for about an hour or so before all of a sudden the puppy darted off. Doug was used to dogs doing this and knew the dog could see in the dark at least a short distance and smell and could find him again if he wanted to. It was a wild animal after all and needed to find its own path in life. Doug kept going, and within 5 minutes had worked his way to a stream. This is where the puppy was. The puppy had half of its head in the water, drinking as ferociously as it could without falling in altogether due to its comically large head. Doug noticed that the dog was still so small, there was no way it could swim or even wade across this tiny stream. There was only one spot where it was even safe for the puppy to go, so that's where it was. "You've been here before, I see," Doug said to the puppy. The puppy perked an ear up, but kept drinking. Apparently he had been waiting for someone to bring it to the water destination. Doug snapped his flashlight off, but didn't immediately fill his canteen. He knew better. Doug instead got out his water purifier and modified it to pump clean water directly into his canteen. Always told were the urban legends of drinking water and only for a dead animal to be just around the bend upstream, so always purified the water. The puppy, almost top-heavy from its head being so big, kept a careful balance on the water's edge. It looked up at one moment at Doug, trying to inquire why Doug wasn't stuffing his face in the water as well. The dog looked at Doug as if to say, "Aren't you thirsty, big buddy?" Doug responded, "I can't somehow magically drink this water without issues like you can, little buddy." The puppy seemed to shrug like it was a first world problem or something, then went back to its balancing act of water consumption. He took out his filter, which had already been cleaned and pumped dry from prior use. Then he unfurled his collapsible bag and filled it with the untreated water. Doug took the bag and attached it to his filter, then squeezed all of the clean water into his canteen. He repeated this process a few times and then rested and drank nearly the entire canteen of fresh filtered mountain water. The filter removed bacteria and protozoa, but wouldn't remove chemicals, metals, and viruses. Doug wasn't too concerned, though, because he knew the stream wasn't down from a biohazard plant, and also the dog knew it was safe to drink. The most important thing was to get the bacteria as well as the giardia. In that regard, that's what his filter did. Doug reached down into the stream with his collapsible water bag and filled up his canteen using the water filter and water from the stream again. Being done with the process, he put all the parts away. Before putting the filter itself away, though, he shook it out and made sure to get all the water out. Then he used the pump to back flush and dry the filter out completely. He didn't want to get water everywhere, and it couldn't be allowed to freeze someday. That is what would happen if the water was left in the filter and forgotten in the cold. Then he threw the components all back in their baggie with some oxygen absorbers and called it good. Satisfied that all of his water filter parts were put away, Doug set himself to the task of how to get across the river. He estimated it was several feet deep with a strong stream. Strong flow? Strong current. Possibly an extra foot deep somewhere in the middle. Up and down the stream Doug previewed, but couldn't find any fallen logs to potentially cross. Unfortunately, Doug had to cross, and he couldn't delay for very long. He decided to check upstream where he heard the water seemed to pick up speed. That meant the water was pushing past something. Doug went upstream and the puppy followed, also being done with its water time. Doug took a few winding turns as he went higher in elevation. A clearing was reached, and Doug could see the dull red glow in the night. It was in the distance, sitting there waiting for the wind to change directions again, trying to climb up the next hill that it had found. Doug wanted to make a face at it, then realized he didn't want to tempt fate. He shined his flashlight around and saw where the speed changed and the flow of water was coming from. There was a beaver dam that was clogging up an already tight spot in the river. The river normally seemed about 15 feet shoulder to shoulder. This choke point put it at about 8 feet. The dam seemed to be at about 12 feet. Doug looked down at the puppy, and the puppy looked up at him and gave him the facial expression of nope.